Okay, let's pick back up with the United States in the Pacific Theater, which is Unit 21.5. The fact of the matter is that this is one of the most untalked about parts of World War II, right? All the movies, all the books, all of the fame is behind the European theater. Not a lot is really done on the Pacific Theater, which is a shame because it's one of the most interesting and complex parts of World War II. It's just not really talked about all that much. So, in this unit, one thing that I want you to keep track of is just the themes, right? There are a lot of major battles that go on in the Pacific. You don't need to keep track of them all right? I'm going to brush through them in this PowerPoint. I'm going to mention them, but not really talk about them because you don't need to memorize the specific battles. You need to understand the theme of the Pacific. And the major theme number one, is going to be, theme number one is production. Right? America can produce a lot of stuff, a lot of technology, and then when that technology is damaged, it can replace it. All right, and that is one of the major themes. That is one of the major reasons that the United States is so successful in the Pacific, because it can outproduce the Japanese. And because this was a naval war, technology is going to be the main part of it, right? Manpower doesn't really mean that much if you don't have the technology to transport that manpower. So the Pacific is definitely a technologically driven war. All right, so let's take a look at this here, right? This is a map of the Japanese Empire at its height. Okay, it's pretty blurry on here, which is unfortunate, but it's large, right? The Japanese Empire, they took over a lot, but they are all islands, right? So from very, very early on in the Second World War, the United States is going to adopt a very, very, very new tactic. I have to pull up this pen again. It is called island hopping. Okay, boom. That is the United States tactic in the Pacific in the Second World War. Essentially, the idea of we need to go from here, maybe to here. All right, and then after here, we're going to go to here, and then after here, we're going to go to here, and then here, and then here, and then that's not even an island. But you guys get the point, right? We need to hop from island to island to island to island, right? We cannot just sail right to mainland Japan because we are going to get counterattacked and outflanked, and our ships are going to get sunk. So that is a tactic the United States brings to the table, which requires, again, a lot of technology, a large naval fleet, which we had, and the ability to launch amphibious invasions, which we had done in Operation Torch, which we will do far after we start doing it here. But during D-Day, the same idea. We need to go from a beach, go on land, and take each and every one of these small islands in the Pacific. Okay, so the Doolittle rates, this is going to be one of the first things. This is going to change the kind of tone, the tenor of the Pacific. This is one of the first things that happened after the attack on Pearl Harbor, once America kind of picks itself back up, right? They're going to send B-25s, which, again, I talked about them in Term 3, right? Or if you're not watching this video in a term, in Unit 21.0 and 21.1, the United States sees the Battle of Britain, right? It sees how many planes got shot down by, how many bomber planes got shot down by fighter planes, so we're going to develop technology to make the bomber planes go higher than the fighter planes can. And they were the B series, right? We've got the B-17, the B-25, and later the B-52, which is going to come after World War II, but you guys get the point. So the B-52 is going to be launched from one of these things, right? An aircraft carrier. This is the main technology of the Second World War in the Pacific. We would not have done what we did without an aircraft carrier, because this means I don't need land anymore, right? And in this island hopping strategy, we don't always have land to take our planes off from, or large enough land to take all of our planes off from. So they were housed on aircraft carriers, and we had the ability to produce more aircraft carriers than Japan and replace the aircraft carriers that we had that got damaged. one of the most kind of famous ships in the Second World War in the Pacific is the USS Enterprise. The History Channel does a great documentary series. It's called Battlefield 360, and it follows the Big E, as they called it, around the Pacific. The Japanese referred to it as the ghost ship, right? It wouldn't sink. It just kept coming back. It was an unsinkable ship, in their opinion. They kept on trying. It would go in for repairs, get repaired, go right back out into the water. So it was in almost every single major battle of the Pacific. So, I mean, this is a huge technology from the Second World War. Again, aircraft carriers. So we launch B-25s from the Hornet, which was an aircraft carrier at the time. It's not gonna make it the entirety of the war, but you guys get it. And we hit Tokyo, right? So we're gonna tell Japan, you hit us, we can hit you right back, and we can hit you in your homeland if we want to. So it's really gonna change the tenor, the momentum. And there's a picture of a B-25 taking off from an aircraft carrier. Coral Sea. All right, so very early on, if we go back to our map right here, all right, we could not let the Japanese get to Australia, all right, for total control over the Pacific and everything that Australia brought to the table. The fact that we were able to have a friendly country that's that large, that's close to house our troops as a jumping off point for the first part of the attacks is very, very, very important. So the Battle of Coral Sea is essentially going to be over Australia. All right, we win. Okay, the Americans win. The Japanese are never able to reach Australia. Midway. All right, this is the one battle that you should know. If you remember back from 21 point, not even 21, but Unit 10, right, when we're just talking about World War II, Midway is one of the turning points, okay? The Japanese were expanding. Midway is an island that is quite literally midway between Japan and Hawaii, or Japan and Hawaii. It's one of the first major battles of the Second World War. Essentially what happened is the United States broke the Japanese code. We leaked a false message to the Japanese and made them think they were safe for an attack. We realized that they were attacking. We had a large counterattack. It was a major naval battle, and the United States were able to sink a few of the Japanese aircraft carriers, whereas the Japanese were only able to they sank less aircraft carriers of ours than we did theirs, right? It says that right here, okay? And those aircraft carriers that were damaged by the United States, we were, again, able to reproduce, put more ships out into the ocean, and the Japanese were never able to recoup their losses from the Battle of Midway. So it's a turning point. They are expanding. Midway happens, they regress. Okay? Here's the Battle of Midway. Right here. Again, kind of midway. Some more pictures of everything that happened in the Battle of Midway. You guys, again, do not need to understand the entirety of it. Alright, just pictures depicting the battles in the Pacific, right? A lot of Navy, a lot of water, a lot of planes. Alright? Midway was not technically Japanese territory, so they haven't really lost anything yet. But again, island hopping, right? Now we prevented them from taking Australia. We prevented them from taking Midway. Now they're going to start to converge in on themselves because we are going to go to island, and start to dominate the Pacific that way. This is a big part right here. Superiority of the sea and air helped the American cause, right? We had superior technology. These are the Solomon Islands, again, close to Australia. Again, the prevention of the Japanese taking Australia was paramount, and we were able to do that. This is the name of a very famous battle, the Battle of Guadalcanal. Okay, again, we are able to prevent Guadalcanal is in the Solomon Islands. We are able to prevent the Japanese from advancing to Australia. Okay, this is General Douglas MacArthur. All right, he is going to be the Supreme Allied Commander for the forces in the Pacific. So he is the Dwight D. Eisenhower of the Pacific. Okay. All of these yellow things are major battles in the Pacific. So as you can see, there are a lot, right? There are a lot of battles in the Pacific, and a lot of them are not really talked about, right? So we just mentioned Coral Sea right there. We mentioned Guadalcanal. We mentioned Midway. You guys already know about Pearl Harbor. There's Wake Island. There's the Battle of Leyte Gulf. There are a ton of super interesting battles in the Pacific that often get overlooked. Here's Guadalcanal. I'm just going to kind of speed through these. Leyte Gulf, one of the big things of Leyte Gulf is by this point in the war, the Japanese have faced such defeats that their most experienced pilots, right? Remember early on in the war, I told you the Japanese had really great pilots and a really great plane, the Zero. They still had the really great plane, but their pilots were dying out. So they had to resort to young, untrained pilots, and they realized that sometimes these pilots are not going to be able to win a battle with technology, so they are going to have to use their planes as an ultimate weapon, all right? And that's called kamikaze, all right? So they're going to start flying their planes into either U.S. planes or U.S. boats to try and sink those boats. The Americans were just dominating up to that point, so this is kind of the last effort by the Japanese. Iwo Jima and Okinawa are hugely famous battles, and they're super important. So if we go back to our map, right, this is all the way. All right, Iwo Jima here, Okinawa here. They are Japanese home islands, right? Everything else that I'm talking about was stuff that was taken over by the Japanese. Okinawa and Iwo Jima are Japanese native islands, right? They're very, very, very close to Japan itself. So these islands are going to be incredibly well defended by the Japanese, and they're very important for America. These are the last steps of island hopping before we got to Japan. And Japan is going to defend them with everything that they had. Remember all the way back from kind of year one in the Path to Global War Japan, I told you about that Bushido, right, the samurai code, and it's honorable to die in battle. It makes it very hard to defeat the Japanese. They don't really know the word surrender. So the death tolls on these islands, right? Iwo Jima is something like 5 or 7 square miles long. It's not a lot, right? Over 150,000 people die on that one island. Taking one single island, it was that kind of death toll. So the battling on Iwo Jima and Okinawa are going to be one of the decisions, or one of the factors that Truman makes, or Truman uses, to make the decision of dropping the atomic bombs on Japan. Because we realize that that's not even the mainland of Japan yet, right? That's not even the main island of Japan. That many people died taking a 7-mile radius island. What's going to happen when we try to take over Tokyo, right? We're going to have millions of deaths. So it's one of the factors that lead to the idea behind the dropping of the atomic bomb. Again, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The 3 battles you should know, right? Midway, Iwo, and Okinawa. This is Iwo Jima itself. It was called Sulphur Island. It was a volcanic island, like most of the I think all of the Japanese islands. This is Mount Suribachi right here. That was an active volcano. Amazing, amazing, amazing movie about this island. It's Flags of Our Fathers, and that's from the U.S. perspective. And then Letters from Iwo Jima, and that's from the Japanese perspective. And it's a great movie to watch kind of back to back. It doesn't matter which one you start with, but really, really cool movie. And the reason that it gets the name Flags of Our Fathers is because this happened on Mount Suribachi. So essentially when the Marines got to the top of Mount Suribachi, they raised this flag to tell the troops down low that they had reached the top of the mountain, and the battle was almost over. This is going to become one of the most reproduced images in the world at the time, because it was a sign back home that we were winning the war in the Pacific. And it was sold around the United States as kind of this rally cry for people to donate more money. They were called war bonds. So buy war bonds and support the troops so they can keep doing stuff like this. So it is a monumental picture and a monumental moment in the battle in the Pacific. Here's Okinawa. Again, same story, right? Here's Okinawa, very close to Japan. It's a native island. Amphibious invasions. All right, these are called Zippo tanks, where the Japanese. What made them so hard is they tunneled so deep into these islands Okinawa, right? Fun fact. So for 2 weeks, the United States Navy stood off the coast of Okinawa, and they dropped more bombs on Okinawa, right? An island that is a blip on the map. Look at it. That's Okinawa right there. They dropped more bombs on the island of Okinawa in 2 weeks than they did the entirety of World War II on Germany. All right? And when the U.S. troops invaded that island, the Japanese just came out from under the ground because they had such advanced tunneling systems. The bombing did absolutely nothing. All right, so we brought in these Zippo tanks to kind of blow them out of their holes, so to speak. Kamikaze. Here's an actual picture of the kamikaze mission. That plane is about to hit that boat. It's a boat that is, again, about to get hit by a plane. That's the boat after it gets hit by the plane. And then we have the Manhattan Project. I'm gonna come back for part 2 of this. All right, so I will see you guys soon.